You know, it's funny how we get comfortable with routines. I've always been a creature of habit. Wake up, get my coffee, head to work, come home, rinse and repeat. One of those habits, one that I barely even thought about, was carpooling with Sarah. We'd been doing it for almost a year. Every morning at 7:30 sharp, I'd meet her at the same spot, right near the shops at 3500 Peachtree R&D, Nebraska in Buckhead, Atlanta. She'd drive me and a few others to work, and it saved me the hassle of fighting through morning traffic. But one morning, everything was different. I should have known something was off the second I walked up to the car. I remember it like it happened yesterday. The morning was overcast, that kind of weird, foggy light that makes everything seem grey. I was tired from staying up late working on a project, so I wasn't really paying attention to much of anything when I saw Sarah's car parked in the usual spot. Except, it wasn't her car. I stopped for a second, thinking I might have gotten it wrong, but no, the license plate was the same and it was definitely her usual spot. It was a black Honda Civic, same make, same model, but I could tell something was different. The windows were a bit darker, and there was a dull dent on the passenger door. Maybe she got into a fender bender? I thought to myself. I didn't think too much of it because, well, it's Atlanta. People are always getting rear-ended around here. Still, I hesitated. Something didn't sit right with me, but I shrugged it off, convincing myself it was just one of those weird mornings, and opened the door. The first thing I noticed when I slid into the back seat was that Sarah wasn't driving. A guy was sitting in the driver's seat instead. He was tall, stocky, with a beard that was more scruff than anything else. He didn't look up at me as I got in, just stared straight ahead. I immediately felt uneasy. Where's Sarah?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but the edge in my voice was undeniable. The guy finally looked over at me through the rearview mirror. His eyes were cold, detached. "Sarah's not feeling well. She asked us to fill in for her today," he said in a monotone voice. I blinked, processing what he said. "Us?" I glanced around the car. That's when I noticed the other two passengers in the front and back seats, both complete strangers to me. There was a woman in the passenger seat, mid-30 seconds, wearing sunglasses even though it was overcast, and another guy in the back with me, his hoodie pulled low over his face. Neither of them acknowledged my presence. My stomach twisted. "I didn't hear anything about that," I said, my voice trailing off. The woman in the front finally spoke, her voice low and firm. "Yeah, she wasn't feeling well this morning. We're all part of the same carpool group. She thought it'd be best if we filled in." None of this made sense. I'd been carpooling with Sarah for a year, and I'd never seen these people before. I wanted to get out of the car, but something kept me there. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe I was just too tired to think straight. Or maybe I was scared of making a scene, so I stayed. The ride started like any other, the car merging into Peachtree Road traffic. But then I noticed something else that didn't add up. The route was off. Instead of heading toward the freeway, the driver took a left turn into a more industrial area, full of warehouses and loading docks. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, "I think you're going the wrong way. The freeway's the other direction." The driver didn't respond right away, just kept staring ahead like I hadn't said anything. The woman in the front seat shifted slightly, glancing back at me for a split second before speaking. "We're avoiding some construction," she said, her tone calm but cold. "Don't worry, we'll get you to work on time." The pit in my stomach grew larger. I checked my phone for the time and tried pulling up Google Maps to see if there was any actual construction. Nothing showed up, just normal traffic. Something was very wrong. I texted Sarah, hoping she'd respond and clear things up. But no reply. I sent another one, trying to keep my cool, but still nothing. I glanced at the guy next to me, the one in the hoodie, but he was staring out the window like he couldn't care less about what was going on. It was as if I wasn't even there. The car slowed down, pulling into a narrow alleyway between two massive warehouses. My heart started racing. This wasn't right. Okay, seriously, where the hell are we going? I asked, my voice louder now, the panic setting in. The driver finally spoke, his voice gruff. You need to calm down, Jared. We're almost there. Almost there? Almost where? I felt a surge of adrenaline rush through me. This was it. This was my moment to get out of the car. I reached for the door handle, but when I pulled it, it didn't budge. The door was locked from the inside. What the hell? Let me out! I shouted, now fully panicked. The woman in the front seat turned around to face me. Her sunglasses were still on, but her expression was hard, serious. You don't want to do that, she said, her voice low and threatening. I was trapped. The guy next to me shifted slightly, almost as if he was waiting for me to do something. I glanced out the window, hoping to see someone, anyone who could help. But the alley was completely deserted. My phone buzzed in my hand and I glanced down at the screen. It was a message from Sarah. Jared, whatever you do, don't say anything. Don't try to escape. I stared at the message in disbelief. What the hell was happening? Before I could process it, the car came to a stop in front of one of the warehouses. The driver turned off the engine and for the first time, he turned to look directly at me. We're here. Here. Where? I was on the verge of demanding an explanation when the doors finally unlocked with a soft click. The guy in the hoodie opened his door and stepped out, motioning for me to follow. I hesitated for a moment, my instincts screaming at me to stay in the car. But what choice did I have? I stepped out into the cold, stale air of the warehouse district. The place was massive, concrete, steel beams and endless rows of loading docks. I could hear the distant hum of machinery, but otherwise it was eerily quiet. The woman in the sunglasses walked ahead of me, leading the way toward one of the loading docks. The other guy, the one who had been sitting next to me, followed closely behind. I glanced back at the car, considering making a run for it, but the driver's cold stare through the rearview mirror stopped me. I wasn't getting out of this that easily. We approached a large metal door, and the woman tapped on it 3 times. A moment later, it creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior. I could make out a few shadowy figures moving around inside, but it was too dark to see clearly. Inside, the driver grunted, nodding toward the open door. I hesitated, but the woman in sunglasses gave me a hard shove, pushing me forward. I stumbled inside, my heart racing as the door slammed shut behind me. The room was small, barely furnished, with nothing but a few folding chairs and a table covered in papers. 2 men sat at the table, both wearing dark suits and speaking in hushed tones. They looked up as we entered, their eyes narrowing as they sized me up. "This is him?" one of the men asked, his voice low and gravelly. The woman in the sunglasses nodded. "Yeah, Jared." I stood there, my mind racing, trying to piece together what was happening. Why had they brought me here? What did they want with me? One of the men at the table gestured for me to sit. I hesitated, glancing around the room for any sign of escape, but there was none. Reluctantly, I sat down in one of the chairs, my heart pounding in my chest. "What's going on?" I finally asked, my voice trembling. "Where's Sarah?" The men exchanged glances and one of them spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Sarah's fine, Jared, but we need to talk." "Talk? About what?" I demanded, my fear quickly turning to anger. "What is this?" The man leaned forward, his expression serious. "We're undercover officers, Jared. This carpool route has been part of an ongoing investigation. We believe Sarah has been involved in a human trafficking ring, and today was supposed to be a major sting operation. But your presence, it complicated things." I stared at him, my mind reeling. "Sarah? Trafficking? No, that's impossible. I've been riding with her for a year." The other man, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. "Sarah's been using her carpool as a front, moving people from place to place under the radar. We've been watching her for months, but we didn't realize she had someone like you, an innocent carpooler, mixed up in this. We were going to arrest her today, but your presence changed the dynamic. We couldn't let the operation proceed as planned with you caught in the middle." I sat there, frozen, the words washing over me like cold water. Sarah? Trafficking? It didn't make sense. I'd known her for a year, sure, she was a little distant at times, but we talked almost every day during the rides. She was just normal. This had to be a mistake. "This can't be real," I muttered, shaking my head. "There's no way Sarah's involved in something like that. She's a regular person." One of the officers, the one with the gravelly voice, leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "You'd be surprised how often the people involved in this kind of operation seem completely normal. That's part of the game. People like Sarah, they blend in, they make you trust them." The woman in sunglasses, who I now realized was also one of the undercover agents, took off her shades, revealing sharp, piercing eyes. "We've been building a case on Sarah for months, tracking her movements, following her every step. Today was supposed to be the day we caught her in the act. But when you got into the car, everything changed. I could barely process what she was saying. My mind was spinning, and I felt sick to my stomach. So, what? You let me ride along with a bunch of strangers, take me to some creepy warehouse, and then tell me Sarah's a criminal? Why didn't you just pull me aside and explain it before?" The man at the table let out a sigh, rubbing his forehead. "We didn't have time, Jared. Once the operation was set in motion, we couldn't stop it. We had to make sure you stayed safe while we carried out the sting. That's why we brought you here, to keep you away from Sarah and out of harm's way." I felt a flash of anger rise up in me. "Safe? You call dragging me into a dark alley and locking me in a warehouse keeping me safe? I thought I was about to be kidnapped." The other officer, the quieter one, finally spoke up. "We understand this was traumatic for you, but it was the only way we could guarantee your safety without blowing the operation. If we had pulled you out in public, it would have tipped Sarah off, and she might have disappeared." I slumped back in the chair, trying to wrap my head around everything. My chest felt tight, and the adrenaline that had been coursing through me was starting to wear off, leaving me exhausted and shaky. The thought of Sarah being involved in something as horrific as human trafficking was almost too much to handle. "So, what happens now?" I asked quietly. The woman crossed her arms, her expression softening just slightly. "We need your help, Jared. We need you to act like everything is normal. Get back in the car with us, finish the ride, and don't let on that you know anything. Sarah is supposed to pick up a new passenger today, and we need to catch her in the act." I stared at her, my mind reeling. "You want me to pretend like I'm okay with this? That I don't know what's going on? You're asking me to help catch someone who's been part of my daily routine for a year?" The officer with the gravelly voice leaned forward. "We know it's a lot to ask, but you're the key to making this operation work. If Sarah suspects anything, she'll bolt, and we'll lose our chance to bring her down. We can't do this without you." I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to be involved in any of this. But I also knew that if I didn't help, people might continue to get hurt, trafficked, or worse. "Fine," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll help." The officers exchanged glances, and the woman nodded. "Good. We'll make sure you're protected the entire time. You won't be in any danger. We'll be watching every step of the way." They walked me through the plan, laying out every detail, every step I needed to take. I'd get back in the car with them, act like everything was normal, and let them take me back to Sarah. Once the new passenger was picked up, they'd move in and make the arrest. It sounded simple enough, but the weight of what was happening hung heavy over me. The ride back to Sarah's usual pickup spot was tense, to say the least. I sat in the backseat, barely breathing, my hands clenched into fists on my lap. The woman in sunglasses, Agent Martin, she'd said her name was, sat in the front, silent and focused. The other agent, the one who had been driving before, glanced at me occasionally through the rearview mirror, but said nothing. When we finally pulled up to the spot near Peachtree, I could see Sarah's car already parked there, waiting. My stomach twisted into knots as I got out of the car and approached her vehicle. Everything felt surreal, like I was walking into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Sarah smiled as I approached, waving like it was any other morning. "Hey, Jared!" Sorry about today, had some car trouble, but everything's good now." I forced a smile, my heart pounding in my chest. "No worries. Just glad you're feeling better." She didn't seem nervous. In fact, she seemed completely at ease, like nothing was wrong. For a moment, I doubted everything the agents had told me. Maybe this was all a mistake. Maybe Sarah wasn't involved in anything. But then, as we started driving, something changed. We weren't heading toward the freeway again. Instead, Sarah took a sharp turn down a side street, leading us into another industrial area. My pulse quickened. I glanced out the window, trying to spot the other car with the agents. They were following at a distance, just as they'd promised. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. After a few minutes, Sarah pulled into an empty parking lot near an old rundown building. I felt my hands start to tremble. Sarah? What are we doing here?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she parked the car and turned to me, her expression completely different now, cold, calculating. "I need to pick someone up," she said flatly. My blood ran cold. This was it. This was what the agents had been talking about. I tried to play it cool, forcing a laugh. "Oh, okay. Shouldn't we be heading to work, though? I don't want to be late." She didn't respond, just stared at me for a moment, her eyes hard and unreadable. My heart was pounding in my chest, and for the first time, I was genuinely terrified of her. The door to the building opened, and a man stepped out, a man I didn't recognize. He walked toward the car with purpose, and I knew in that moment that this was the passenger the agents had been waiting for. As he approached the car, I glanced at the rearview mirror, trying to catch a glimpse of the agents. I couldn't see them, but I knew they were there, watching, waiting for the right moment to move in. The man opened the passenger door and got in, nodding to Sarah. "Let's go," he said gruffly. This was it. This was the moment. Just as Sarah shifted the car into drive, the sound of screeching tires filled the air. I turned to see the agent's car speeding toward us, lights flashing. Sarah's eyes widened in shock, and before she could react, they boxed her in, blocking the car from moving. "Police! Hands in the air!" Agent Martin shouted as she jumped out of the car, her gun drawn. Sarah froze, her hands trembling as she raised them slowly. The man in the passenger seat cursed under his breath, but didn't resist. Within seconds, the agents had them both out of the car and in handcuffs. I sat there in the back seat, my heart pounding, unable to believe what had just happened. It was over. The days after Sarah's arrest were a blur. The agents told me that they'd been investigating her for months, following her movements and gathering evidence. She had been using her carpool to transport people as part of a trafficking operation, and I had been riding along with her, completely unaware. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. I had trusted her. I had shared rides with her for a year, and all the while, she had been hiding something so dark, so sinister. It's been months since that day, and I still think about it every time I get into a car. I'm back to driving myself to work now. No more carpools, no more routines. I don't think I'll ever be able to trust something as simple as a car ride again. Because you never really know who you're riding with. I've never been one for road trips, but that day, I had no choice. My boss had sent me on an urgent errand, and I found myself driving down an endless stretch of highway through rural Texas. The wide, flat landscape stretched out on both sides, dotted with the occasional rundown gas station or dusty ranch sign. It was the kind of place where cell service was spotty and towns were miles apart. I was about halfway between Houston and San Antonio, somewhere near McKinney Street, when the car started to sputter. I glanced at the dashboard. Everything seemed fine, but there was a slight rumbling beneath the hood, like something wasn't right. I hoped it was nothing serious, but that hope faded fast. "Hey, are you hearing that?" I asked, turning to Maya, my passenger. Maya was a quiet woman, mid-30s maybe, and I didn't know much about her beyond the fact that we'd met through a rideshare service in Houston. She had asked for a ride out to San Antonio, and since I was headed that way anyway, it made sense to take her along. She'd been on her phone most of the trip, barely speaking to me except to ask how much longer the drive would be. Now she looked up, her expression tense. "Yeah, I hear it. Is everything okay?" "I don't know," I muttered, gripping the wheel a little tighter. "I'm gonna pull over and check it out." I pulled the car onto the shoulder of the road, the engine coughing one last time before dying completely. The dashboard lights flickered off, and the car went silent. My stomach dropped. This wasn't good. I stepped out, the hot Texas air hitting me like a wall. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the empty road. I popped the hood and leaned in, but I was no mechanic. I didn't know what I was looking for. Everything just looked like a mess of wires and metal to me. Maya stepped out of the car, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. She seemed anxious, glancing down the road every few seconds. "Is it bad?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Could be something simple, or it could be worse." Her face tightened. "I can't afford to be late. I have an important meeting tonight. I'll try to get us some help," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. Sure enough, no signal, not even a single bar. "Great," I muttered under my breath. Maya let out a frustrated sigh, pacing near the car. "I really can't be late, Chris. You don't understand." Her anxiety was starting to get to me. "Look, I'll flag down the next car that comes by. We'll get a tow or something. Just give it a minute." But that's the thing about roads like these. Minutes feel like hours. The sun was dropping lower, and the endless stretch of highway was growing darker by the second. No cars, no signs of life. Just as I was about to suggest we walk to the nearest gas station, I heard the low rumble of an engine in the distance. A truck was coming toward us, its headlights cutting through the fading light. I stepped out onto the road, waving my arms to get the driver's attention. The truck slowed down and pulled over behind us. It was an old pickup, caked in dirt like it had seen years of tough miles. The driver's door creaked open and a man stepped out. He was in his late 40s or so, wearing a worn-out baseball cap and a grease-stained shirt. His face was weathered, and there was something about the way he moved, slow, deliberate, that made me uneasy. "Car trouble," he called out, his voice rough and raspy. "Yeah," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Engine just died on us. I'm not sure what's wrong." The man walked over, glancing at Maya briefly before leaning over the hood to take a look. "Name's Tom," he said, not bothering to make eye contact. "I'm a mechanic. I can take a look if you want." I should have been relieved. A mechanic showing up out of nowhere was just what we needed. But something about Tom felt off. Maybe it was the way he was watching Maya, or the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. Maya shifted uncomfortably, stepping back from the car. "Do you think you can fix it?" she asked, her voice a little too tense. Tom didn't answer right away. He fiddled with the engine for a few minutes, muttering to himself before finally standing up and wiping his hands on his jeans. "Looks like a busted fuel pump. I could fix it, but it'll take some time." Maya checked her watch, her face tight with worry. "How long?" "Couple hours, maybe more. I've got the parts back at my shop just down the road," Tom said, his eyes flicking to Maya again. "I could give you a ride there while we wait." I didn't like the sound of that. The idea of riding with this guy, heading off to some unknown shop in the middle of nowhere, it didn't sit right with me. And Maya's anxiety wasn't helping. "That's kind of you, but maybe we'll wait here," I said, trying to sound polite but firm. Tom smiled, but there was something off about it, too friendly, too eager. "Suit yourself, but it's getting dark. You don't want to be stuck out here all night, do you?" He had a point. The last thing we wanted was to be stranded on a desolate highway with no cell service and no help coming anytime soon. But something in my gut told me not to trust this guy. Maya took a step forward, her voice urgent. "Chris, we need to go. I really can't be late for my meeting." Her insistence made me pause. I was caught between her anxiety and my own suspicions about Tom. I didn't know what to do. Tom leaned against the truck, watching us with an unsettling calm. "Up to you, but I'm the only one who's going to help you out here." I glanced at Maya. She was practically trembling now, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Chris, please," she whispered. "We have to go." Reluctantly, I nodded. "Fine, we'll go with you." Tom smiled that same unsettling smile and motioned for us to get in his truck. "Hop in. I'll take you to my shop." As we climbed into the cab of the truck, I felt a growing sense of unease. Maya sat stiffly beside me, staring straight ahead, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of her seat. Tom got behind the wheel and started the engine, and we pulled away from my broken-down car, heading down the dark, empty road. The drive was tense. Tom didn't say much, but I noticed him glancing at Maya every now and then, like he was studying her. Maya, for her part, seemed on edge, her body tense, like she was preparing for something. "How far is your shop?" I asked, trying to break the silence. "Not far," Tom replied, his voice casual. "Just a few more miles." I nodded, glancing at Maya. Her face was pale and I could see the fear in her eyes. Something wasn't right. Why was she so anxious? And why did Tom seem so interested in her? After what felt like an eternity, we finally pulled into a small dirt lot behind a rundown building. The shop looked like it hadn't been used in years. Rusted tools scattered around, an old lift half collapsed, and a broken neon sign that flickered weakly in the darkness. Tom killed the engine and turned to us. "You two can wait inside while I get the parts," he said, motioning toward the shop. Maya didn't move. She just sat there, staring at the shop, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I glanced at her, confused. "What's going on, Maya?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned to Tom, her eyes hard. "I know who you are," she said quietly. Tom's smile faded. His expression darkened, and for the first time I saw a flash of something dangerous in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my heart pounding. Maya took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she reached into her jacket and pulled out a small badge. "I'm with the FBI, Chris. This whole thing, it was a setup." My mind reeled. FBI? A setup? None of this made sense. Tom's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't have gotten involved, Maya," he said, his voice low and dangerous. I stared at Maya, trying to process what was happening. "What do you mean, a setup?" Maya's voice was steady, though I could see the fear in her eyes. "We've been tracking Tom for months. He's involved in human trafficking, and we needed to catch him in the act. That's why I had to be on this trip, but you weren't supposed to be part of IIT." Tom moved faster than I expected, reaching for something in his jacket. I reacted on instinct, grabbing Maya's arm and pulling her out of the truck just as Tom lunged toward us. We hit the ground hard, and I scrambled to my feet, pulling Maya with me. "Run!" she screamed, yanking me toward the dark expanse behind the shop. My heart was pounding, my mind barely able to process what was happening. Tom wasn't just some small-town mechanic. He was dangerous, and Maya, the quiet passenger I'd been driving for hours, was an FBI agent in the middle of a sting operation. Tom was out of the truck now, moving fast, his footsteps heavy on the gravel behind us. "You should have stayed out of this!" he shouted, his voice filled with anger. I didn't need to be told twice to run. My adrenaline surged as I sprinted through the dark, Maya right beside me. The ground was uneven, rocks and weeds tripping me up as we fled deeper into the Texas night. I could hear Tom cursing behind us, his footsteps growing louder. "Keep going!" Maya urged, her breath coming in short, quick bursts. "We just need to get out of his sight." We tore through the darkness, the faint light from Tom's shop fading behind us. My lungs burned from the effort, but fear kept me moving. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear Tom crashing through the brush not far behind. He was relentless, and I knew if he caught up with us, we were done for. Maya stumbled, almost falling, but I grabbed her arm, pulling her forward. "There's a ditch up ahead," she gasped. "We can hide there." I didn't question her. We veered to the left, heading toward a small embankment. The ground sloped downward into a shallow ditch filled with overgrown grass and brush. Maya dropped to her knees and motioned for me to follow. We crouched low, barely breathing as we listened to Tom's heavy footsteps approaching. My heart was pounding so loudly in my chest I was sure he'd hear it. The sound of his boots crunching on the gravel grew louder, closer, until he was nearly on top of us. "Come out, Maya." Tom's voice was full of rage. "You think you can stop me? I'll find you, and when I do, you'll regret ever getting involved." Maya pressed her finger to her lips, motioning for me to stay silent. I nodded, my pulse racing as we waited in the thick darkness, barely daring to move. I could hear Tom breathing heavily, his footsteps slowing as he scanned the area. He was looking for us, but the darkness and tall grass gave us a slight advantage. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Tom was still close, muttering under his breath as he stalked around searching. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't come any closer. Suddenly, the sound of a truck engine roared to life. I froze, wondering if someone else had arrived, but when I peeked through the grass, I realized it was Tom. He was heading back to his truck. "What are you doing?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Maya's face was tight with tension. "He's probably getting something, maybe a gun." A shiver ran down my spine. We had to move. I wasn't waiting around to see what Tom had planned next. "Come on," Maya whispered, motioning for me to follow. We crawled out of the ditch as quietly as we could, keeping low to the ground. The truck was a few yards away, and Tom was rummaging in the back. If we could make it past him, maybe we could reach the road and flag someone down. As we moved through the shadows, my foot hit something hard. I winced, barely stifling a groan, but it was too late. Tom whipped his head around, eyes locking onto us in the dark. "There you are," he snarled, pulling something long and metallic from the truck bed, a tire iron. "Run!" Maya screamed, grabbing my hand and yanking me toward the open field beyond the shop. Tom charged after us, the tire iron raised above his head. I could hear his boots pounding on the ground, getting closer with every step. My legs burned, my lungs screaming for air, but I couldn't stop. If I stopped, I was dead. The field ahead was vast and open, nothing but dry grass and scattered trees. It wasn't much, but it was our only chance. We sprinted across the field, the sound of Tom's footsteps echoing in the night. Maya was faster than me, and I struggled to keep up. I could hear Tom's heavy breathing behind us, feel his presence getting closer. Then, out of nowhere, a blinding light flooded the field. I skidded to a stop, nearly losing my balance as the sound of tires screeching filled the air. A car, a black SUV, came barreling toward us, its headlights cutting through the darkness. "Get down!" Maya shouted, pulling me to the ground just as the SUV slammed to a stop. The doors flew open, and several figures dressed in black tactical gear jumped out, guns drawn. "FBI, get on the ground!" one of them shouted, their voices commanding and firm. Tom froze, the tire iron still raised in his hand, his face twisted in rage. For a moment, I thought he might try to fight, but then he dropped the tool, raising his hands in surrender. The agents moved in, tackling him to the ground and cuffing him. It all happened so fast, I barely had time to process it. Maya stood up, breathing heavily as she dusted herself off. One of the agents approached her, and they exchanged a few words I couldn't hear. Then she turned to me. "Chris, I'm sorry you got caught up in this," she said, her voice sincere but tired. "You weren't supposed to be part of the operation. We were targeting Tom for weeks, trying to catch him in the act. The breakdown was planned, but you threw things oof." I stared at her, still trying to wrap my head around everything. "You're an FBI agent this whole time?" She nodded, her expression softening. "Yeah, I couldn't tell you before. It would have put you in danger." I shook my head, still in shock. "I don't know what to say. I thought we were going to die back to there." Maya gave me a small smile, though I could see the weight of everything in her eyes. "You did good, Chris. You stayed calm, and you helped. That's all that matters." I nodded slowly, still trying to process everything. The agents led Tom away in handcuffs, his face twisted in fury, but there was nothing he could do now. It was over. By the time everything was wrapped up, it was well past midnight. Maya gave me a ride back to my car, where a tow truck was already waiting. The engine failure had been real, but everything else, that had been part of a larger plan. As I watched the tow truck hook up my car, Maya turned to me one last time. "I'm sorry for all of this," she said quietly. "You got caught up in something dangerous, and that wasn't fair to you." I shrugged, still trying to shake the lingering fear from the night. "I guess it makes for a good story, right?" She smiled at that, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, a hell of a story." With that, she got into her SUV and drove off into the night, leaving me standing on the side of the road, the events of the night still swirling in my mind. I never saw Maya again after that, and I never went back to rural Texas, but every now and then when I'm driving alone at night, I think about that breakdown and the way everything seemed so normal until it wasn't.